Welcome to the Asureology Show, a growth hacker's guide to human capital management with your host, Mike Vannoy. Each week, we bring you experts in human resources, employment law, accounting, benefits planning, and more to build productive organizations. You'll gain practical guidance for your business. You'll be alerted to the latest news and mega trends that impact small and mid-sized companies. We'll give you the hands-on information you need to stay compliant with ever-changing employment laws, the strategies you need to win the war for talent, and much more, so you can focus on what you do best, growing your business. Enjoy the show.
The Department of Labor's new higher overtime salary threshold proposal. This is a huge topic. I think it's going to impact something like an expected 3.4 million employees in the United States. A couple of weeks ago, Mary Simmons was my guest on this show, and we unpacked what we thought was going to be some of the framework for the DOL's new law around raising the minimum salary threshold for exempt employees. Early in the year, we expected a quote-unquote end of summer rule from the Department of Labor. We were a little surprised it hadn't come yet. So we at least wanted to set expectations with folks, what we thought that rule might be. Here we are just a few days later, and the Department of Labor has a proposed new rule in place. So it hasn't gone into effect yet. There's potential that it could change, but we do have it in black and white now, what they are thinking and how that might impact employers. So really important topic. Want to unpack that. Perfect guest to do exactly that today. If you're a regular watcher of the show, you know Brian Shenker. He's an attorney at the Long Island, New York office of Jackson Lewis. Brian's practice focuses on representing employers in a wide range of workplace matters, as well as preventative advice and counseling. Brian has extensive experience defending class and collective action lawsuits under federal and state wage and hour laws. He successfully defended wage and hour audits conducted by the U.S. and New York State Departments of Labor. And Brian regularly handles cases before courts, administrative agencies involving claims of discrimination, sexual harassment, and retaliation. Brian, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, so I do not want this to turn into a show where we just talk about what is exempt versus non-exempt, who must comply with this. We've done full 1 hour shows on that exact topic. Encourage everybody to hop on the website, hop on the YouTube channel, and you can find tons of content there. For those who maybe this is their first introduction to it, just give me like 60 seconds if you could. What is exempt versus non-exempt? Why is this so important? How does that back into the FLSA, and why must people be classified properly? Because it really sets up the stage for what this important proposed rule is.
Absolutely. So here goes that summary, Mike. So we'll start with the FLSA. It's the Fair Labor Standards Act, the federal law that sets the floor nationwide for wages, for minimum wage, for exempt employees, and what they need to be paid. Most employers are subject to the FLSA. If you doubt you are, check with an authority, but it applies to a whole lot of employers throughout the U.S. When we talk about exemptions, right, we start with the concept that every employee is presumed to be non-exempt, meaning they're entitled to an hourly rate plus time and a half for overtime if they work over 40 hours. There are exceptions to that rule, and that's what we're talking about today. The exceptions to paying hourly rate and overtime is the exemptions that the FLSA sets. Several of those exemptions that we're speaking about today are the white-collar exemptions. Those are the professional, the administrative, and executive exemptions. They're called white-collar. They're typically your non-manual office employees. And each exemption, each of these white-collar exemptions has several parts to a test that an employee must meet in order to be paid a salary and to not be entitled to overtime. And so there's a duties test, right? That's what we often focus on, the primary duties of the executive, administrative, or professional employee. But then there are two other requirements, and those are what we're really hitting on today: the salary basis and the salary threshold. So the salary basis says that someone needs to be paid a salary. Easy enough. And the salary threshold, which we're really getting at here, is the amount that an exempt employee must be paid on a salary basis each week to preserve that exemption. So that's really the framework, Mike, of what we're getting into today.
Yeah.
And,
okay. So and everybody gets minimum wage, right? That's your non-exempt folks, your hourly employees. A lot of people don't realize, and we see people get in trouble all the time, that they put someone on salary because, hey, we just wanted to give them predictable income. Sometimes their hours are up, sometimes they're down. We put them on salary. That's not how the law works. You're either an exempt employee or you're not exempt. If you're not exempt from overtime, you're paid hourly and you get overtime. If you're an exempt employee, you have to meet one of those duties tests. And then there is a minimum that you must be paid as salary. A lot of people don't realize that, though the number is low enough, it'll be specific, $35,568 a year. That number is low enough that few people get in trouble for that one. However, that hasn't changed in a decade or more. And so this new proposed law, this is a doozy. This is saying this is where 3.4 million, the Department of Labor themselves are saying 3.4 million employees might be impacted by this, and therefore their employers. The threshold is going from $35,568, that's the minimum to pay an exempt worker as a salary, is going from $35,000 to $55,068. So we're talking like a $20,000 jump. I mean, a massive increase in base pay, which means folks are going to have, employers are going to have to massively increase pay for anybody in that middle. So if you have salaried employees making more than $55,000, probably doesn't impact you. It still could in ways we'll discuss, but not immediately, right? But if you have salaried exempt employees between $35,000 and $55,000, by law, if this goes through, I don't know why it wouldn't, you're going to be dramatically impacted in giving people raises or reclassifying as hourly, right? So maybe I stole too much of your thunder there, Brian, but can you just take us through what is in this proposed rule, and what does it even mean to be a proposed rule versus is this now law? How does all this work?
Great. So yeah, let's unpack that. And you're exactly right. This proposed increase is enormous, right? It's a 55% increase from the current level. So like you said, 35,000 a year right now up to 55. To put that in perspective, on a weekly basis, that's $684 a week right now that exempt employees must be paid. That's going up to $1,059. So again, the current level that we're dealing with, these current salary levels have been in effect since 2020, when they were implemented by the Trump administration. And I'd also mention that the test for the annual compensation level for highly compensated workers, that's also going to increase 34% from the current 107,000 to 143,000 per year. And we can get into that exemption a little bit later. It doesn't apply to as many people as these white collar exemptions that we just discussed are being increased to 55,000. So, and really these levels, by the time the final rule is implemented and the regulation takes effect, the DOL has indicated the salary threshold could even be higher. That's because these salary thresholds are based on earnings data. And when the law takes effect, the salary thresholds at that time will be based on the then current earnings data.
Say what you mean by that, because this is because where you're talking at the top, two factors. There's the dollar amount itself, the empirical dollar floor that you got to pay, but then there's also a factor. Explain how that works.
Right. So, and you're talking about the increases here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the DOL has tied the salary levels to a percentile of earnings for full-time salaried workers in the lowest census region in the U.S. Right. So right now they've done that in the past, and they've set it at different percentages. I think when the DOL increased back in 2004, it set it at the 20th percentile. Here it's using the 35th percentile of earnings for full-time workers in that lowest census region. So that's going to increase. And actually, the DOL predicts that as of the first quarter of 2024, the salary level would actually hit 60,000. So by the time this rule takes effect, we might have the lowest salary that an exempt employee could be paid in the U.S. would be at least 60,000. And that's a huge change. And another thing that this proposed rule has that we have not seen previously in any DOL proposed rules is that it has automatic updates. So the DOL proposes that every 3 years, these salary thresholds would be updated to reflect the current earning data. So it's going to be the same percentage of some different data set. And that's something that hasn't necessarily been done before. That said, the DOL would have kind of this exception. They would be able to delay scheduled automatic increases if warranted by unforeseen economic or other conditions. But again, that's a significant one because it wouldn't then require the DOL to implement a new rule every 5-10 years. It's going to be clockwork every 3 years under this proposal.
Yeah. And that's how a lot of contracts work, right? You'll tie a long-term contract to the consumer price index or something like that, so you don't have to renegotiate prices, whether they're going up or down every single year. This is probably a long overdue component, right? Because here, we got folks sitting on pins and needles for a very long time here, and the bump that's going to happen to take someone from 35,000 to 55, maybe even, as you indicated, 60,000. I mean, that's a pretty major deal to a small business owner who might have 5 employees. You're working on a really thin margin in a tough economy, tough labor market, to afford a $20,000 pay increase. Maybe that's all the profit he had. Maybe he only had 10,000 in profit last year. Where's the money going to come from, right? So it's probably a wise provision to make sure that there's always an adjustment mechanism ongoing here.
Right. No, absolutely. And look, for its part, the DOL, the purpose of the new rule, according to the Department of Labor, is to, ensure that fewer, lower paid white collar employees who potentially perform significant amounts of non-exempt work are, included in the exemption. So, the DOL is trying to narrow who can be included in the exemptions by, this large increase in the salary that's required to be paid. I think you mentioned earlier that, it's amazing, potentially over $3.4 million workers, not dollars, are anticipated to be impacted by this. So, it's not, an increase from, 35 to 40 where, how many employees are really making, in that small range. This covers a huge range where employers are going to see likely a number of their employees fall in that range, where the employer is going to have, decisions to make on how to comply with the FLSA going forward.
Right. Some industries may not be impacted. If you're an accounting firm, an architectural firm, a software company that, God bless your employees, their salaries are much higher than that, and might not impact you. But this is going to be very industry specific, I think. And I'm just looking at estimates here of some of the subcategories of that 3.4 million employees that will probably be impacted. You're looking at 300,000 manufacturing jobs, 180,000 hospitality workers, 600,000 people in healthcare that have salaries, they're exempt employees that are going to fall within this range. So maybe before, I'm super interested in learning, and I'm sure everybody watching today is interested in the timeline. When does this take effect? How will it take effect? Will there be a ramp? I want to explore all that. But one of the things when Mary Sims and I discussed this topic a couple weeks ago, there was potentially the DOL was indicating there's going to be two significant components. One was the increase to the salary threshold, which we're talking about here. This is the biggie. The other thing was a potential test, right? What changes might there be to the test for the duties test for what is or is not an exempt employee? Is there anything around the duties test in this proposed new rule?
Right. So the DOL, they did not make any changes to the duties test. It seems that what their take on the duties element of the exemption was that this is something that's well known to employers, what the duties are required for exemptions. And so I think at this time, the DOL didn't want to start changing those as well, even though you're right. In the past, we have heard some rumblings of, potential duties test changes. Nothing here. That's not to say that, employers should just ignore the issue of duties because, look, I think probably hitting on something, we discuss at the end, which is, what should employers do? Look, it's always a good opportunity. It's always a good time to audit your exemptions and look at the duties, regardless of there, being no change to the duties test. Even if you have, job descriptions, have they been updated in the last year? Have they been updated, since the pandemic? Have you reevaluated exemptions since since 2020? Right, a lot of positions at companies have changed a lot in the last 3 years, and so this time, this focus on exemptions, it gives companies a good time, a good opportunity to also make sure that their employees that they're classifying as exempt are meeting those duties tests for the white collar, and other exemptions.
Yeah. Okay. So, that's good news. There's not even more change to come. So no change to the duties test. Let's talk about, This is a big pill for folks to swallow. This is a proposed rule. So this isn't a law. This doesn't have to go through Congress, right? This is the Department of Labor, part of the executive branch that makes decisions. And so this is a proposed law. What technically happens? How does this become legally binding rule? Take us through what this comment period is, when this thing will probably go live. Help us understand what this timeline and logistics are.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right, because this isn't legislation, right? It's a proposed rule by an executive agency, right? It goes through a publication at first, right? So the proposed rule, as we see it, will go into the Federal Register. It hasn't been slated for publication yet, but our best guess is that could come down, potentially within the next, 30 days or so, that it would be put into the Federal Register. And once published, employers and other stakeholders, right? I'm sure, unions and other labor organizations will have 60 days to provide public comments. I believe the last time we had a proposed rule, there were over 300,000 public comments. And once these comments are received, at least as to the substantive comments, the DOL reviews and addresses those comments, and then it publishes a final rule. The final rule, it's not necessarily going to be the same as this proposed rule. In all likelihood, it will be quite similar. And so really, in terms of an effective date, because it hasn't been published in the Federal Register yet, we don't have a date certain, but potentially, based on this timeline, we could have an effective rule as early as January 2024. So it's something to certainly stay tuned on, and, employers shouldn't assume they have, 6-12 months, right? I know last time there were proposed rules by the DOL, on the salary threshold, there were some legal challenges, and that's obviously a wild card in this, so to speak, that could potentially delay the process if organizations file for injunctions as they did back in 2019 and 2020 when the DOL last tried to issue a rule on these salary
in 2019. Was that change as material as this one is? Because this is a giant, a 30+% increase in pay. This is going to crush some people.
So right, the one in 2019, the Trump administration one, that was a much smaller increase. And so where we really saw, we also saw lawsuits back in was it 2016, I want to say, back when the Obama administration proposed a new rule, right? And that was a bigger increase, right? Similar to this one. I think the final number was going to be around $47,000 a year under the Obama administration proposal. And that one was subject to legal challenges and an injunction, and then I believe eventually rescinded. So it leads to questions, right, as to what will happen with this one. So I think we do expect challenges. So it's going to be one of those where we're going to have a timeline. Once this goes final, we'll know when the effective date is. Employers should likely should act as though that's when it will take effect. And if there are challenges, just stay tuned on those.
So that's interesting. I didn't know that back in President Obama's administration that the proposal is to take it to 47. That obviously didn't happen because we're at 35 and change now. You mentioned earlier that you don't think this will probably materially change. If it changed in the past, I'm curious just for your thoughts. Why such a big hit won't be really challenged? What's different this time, you think?
Yeah, well, I do expect it will get challenged, based on, look, the text of the regulations and the FLSA doesn't really, it addresses duties. It doesn't really address dollar numbers for, required to meet an exemption. So there's some argument on that end that, hey, any, salary thresholds improper. There could also be challenges. Right now, there's no Secretary of Labor. I believe we have an acting one, so that could form a challenge. But we will see. But I think you're right that along the lines of the Obama administration's proposed rule being challenged that increased it, the salary threshold a large amount. There will probably be some reaction like that to this one, right? Back in 2020, the Trump administration increase was much more modest, right? And so we perhaps that's the reason we didn't see such reaction to it. But you're right. I mean, here we have a huge jump, as I mentioned earlier, 55%. We've seen some states and localities when they're looking to increase the salary threshold or minimum wage, that they'll do it in steps, right? That, for instance, here in, New York, a few years back, we were at $10 an hour, and at various parts of the state went up, maybe $1 each year, someone a little more. And for the salary threshold, similar jumps. But the DOL here has not proposed any jumps, right? Employers are going to get hit with that jump potentially to around 55 to 60,000 right off the bat, and then every 3 years increases from there.
So, because this is such a big jump, so you indicated the timeline. So once this proposed rule goes on the official register, I think is what you call it. Now you have a 60-day comment period for this to be challenged. That kind of takes us somewhere around the beginning of the year as a likelihood to be implemented. I know. So minimum wage, $7.25 nationally. In where I live in the Midwest. Our county passed legislation to take minimum wage to $15, but they created a 3-year ramp to get there. Do you think that the law doesn't say that? as it stands right now, this is just going to be whenever it takes effect, it's going to take effect. What's the likelihood, in your opinion, that there will be some type of a ramp so employers can prepare budgetarily for this kind of a thing?
Yeah, I could see that as a potential change, right? That maybe it's a phased in approach, or perhaps it's just to a lower number initially, right? And then we'll see that the next automatic increase. So
Yeah.
I think there are some areas for the proposed rule to be played with a bit. The ramp up, I think, is a great idea because it allows employers to plan, right? Many employers have planned for 2024 and their budget and all that. And clearly, right, having to pay however many of your employees, $20,000 more per year is potentially a difficult pill to swallow for many employers, right?
Yeah.
And it could have, real bottom line impact. That said, employers do have a second option as opposed to just increasing salary. They can, if you have an employee who falls, below the new proposed salary threshold, right? Let's say they're making $40,000 per year. You can switch them to an hourly exempt structure, right? As long as you pay them overtime then. So, again, I know there's certainly probably, employee relations issues with that, right? Salaries are looked at as more desirable than hourly rates, and can come with some type of seniority or some type of status. So that can be difficult, but it is an option, right? It is an option that employers can. You can't pay an hourly non-exempt employee a salary, but vice versa is fine, right? You can take an exempt employee and say, hey, we're not going to pay you a salary. We're going to treat you in all regards as an exempt hourly employee who's entitled to overtime. Now, depending on how many hours your exempt employees are working, that may not be a discount, right? You could end up paying more. So
I think that's the crux of the issue, right? So, I mean, if I'm playing mind reader here to the Department of Labor, I think what's really happening here is you continue to see this sea change of HR laws from minimum wage to leave types to background checks to hundreds of new laws across the country in the last decade here. It's this shift to protect employees. And one of them is, hey, we think employers too frequently are just putting people on salary. They're making them exempt employees, and then they're working long hours. And they're like, hey, the DOL is saying, hey, if you're going to work long hours, you need to get paid for your long hours. And so to me, this has probably less to do with 55% pay increase going from $35,000 to $55,000 to forcing employers' hand to moving a bunch of people back to hourly. And then, it's going to create some real situations for those people who were the employees working 40 hours a week. No big deal. Those employees who were working 50 and 60 plus hours a week, all of a sudden this gets real expensive real fast.
Yeah, and certainly, and look, one thing is, as this relates to other laws, right? So many states have, different salary thresholds for the exempt employees that might exceed the FLSA's floor. And just to be clear, right, the FLSA sets a nationwide floor. States and localities are free, and many of them do go and provide stronger protection. So, you see many minimum wages above $7.25 an hour. Many salary threshold requirements are above $34,000. And so, for instance, again, here in New York, we have, some of the highest salary thresholds currently around, in the mid 50s, 50,000s. And, one of the typical things we've said in the past to local employers was, likely result of the final rule is that our local salary threshold will be higher, so you don't have to worry about the FLSA. But here, the new rule could even exceed, New York's high threshold, right? We're pushing 60,000 with the new proposed rules. So across the board, even if you are in a state with salary levels that exceed the FLSA, stay tuned, because the FLSA's new salary threshold could very well exceed most, if not all, state salary thresholds.
Brent, let's maybe step out of the legal and go into just the strategic guidance for employers for a second here. Mary and I covered this a couple of weeks ago, but this is really, really important. As employers prepare for this, I think they should be preparing for more than simply increasing budgets, right? Because that may not even be an option for many people, right? So we talked a little bit about those employees who are kind of in this middle, the 35,000 to 55,000 salaried employees. You did a good job explaining how you could put them on as hourly, make them non-exempt employees. They'd be paid hourly, but now they're going to have to get paid overtime. And that might be fine for some, might not be for others. There's a kind of a cultural strategic component that, it's perceived to be a promotion when you get paid salary, right? Speak for a second about the compression that happens at the top end, right? And I'll maybe set it up for folks. It's maybe today you have a level 1 supervisor who has a base salary of 40,000, and your level 2s have 60,000, and it's a more senior position. And now all of a sudden the floor for your level 1s is 55. You've only got a $5,000 difference between your level 1s and your level 2s. You create this compression issue. So this, not only does it cascade down, it cascades up. What's your coaching for employers to be thinking about this?
Yeah, so I think that salary compression could be one of the biggest impacts of this, right? Because, realistically, each company is not going to have a ton of employees that fall in this range. They very well will have some. But it's not going to be, it may not be dozens or hundreds, right? It may be a few. But again, that's not the only impact, as you're suggesting, because when you take that one employee who maybe they're earning 45,000 now you're going to have to, let's say in 2024, the salary level is 60,000. So now you're going to have to pay that lowest salary worker 60,000. And now you probably have other workers who are earning between 55 to 60 or slightly over 60,000 who are now would be earning less or right around the same as this other employee who's a lower level exempt employee than them. And so, the cascading effect going upwards is everyone will then need to be increased, right? And we've seen this in various states where, for instance, the minimum wage and salary thresholds went up in New York, again, to use that as an example. And that is something that we saw occur in New York. Fortunately, the increases were over a number of years, so employers had more time to plan and set those levels and deal with it. But, here, employers need to get on top of this because they are not going to have all that much time, right? And even though we're not certain as to what exactly the salary threshold will be, we have a ballpark idea of what it will be. And so I think it's a great idea for any employer to not just look at and identify the employees in that 34 to 60 or range, but to look at who do they have over 60. Who's in that 60 to 100 range who might then need to get a bump to, keep those salary levels within the organization, appropriate.
My guidance for employers is a few things. One, you got to simply look at your budgets. But I think it's a mistake to think this is only a budget thing, to see whether you can or can't afford this change. And if I can't afford it, I'm just making people hourly. I think you're missing. I think you're missing an opportunity, and I think you have take on undue risk if you take that more simplistic approach. To me, you really need to look at these jobs. You need to identify what are the job descriptions, what are the outcomes that you want from these jobs, and be thinking about a rebanding of salary ranges and the duties expected for each of those jobs. So maybe today you have one level supervisor. Maybe you break that up into two levels. Maybe you have two levels and maybe you take it down to one. maybe you take it to 3. But how you band and treat different jobs, leadership levels, seniority levels for individual contributors who might still fall in an exemption. You need to really think about your entire job description and how you're casting your employees, right? Because employees are going to watch the news and they're going to wonder, well, why aren't I getting this massive raise that the person in the news said I was going to get, right? So you're going to have to explain the rationale for why you do what you do here, right? Including, hey, this federal law just happened. It would crush us if we gave everybody a $20,000 increase. Here's what we're going to do. We want to be as fair as we can and still stay afloat. Here's our strategy. And you describe the entire thing. So it's job descriptions, it's salary bands, it's communicate with your employees. And I would say have all of that at least developed as call it a plan B that's probably going to become your plan A. What do you think about that approach?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And you really need to take a thoughtful approach to this. This isn't something that a company can just, throw together at the last minute because, like you said, these compression issues and it's not a simple answer for every employee, right? The answer isn't necessarily give everyone a raise up to the new salary threshold, right? There could be reorganization within departments, right? Maybe we go from having several, exempt and, managers of a department to maybe only having one and potentially changing the job duties of those others, making them non-exempt. And, that's, everything's on the table, right? So I don't just see raises, I see changes, making previously exempt individuals non-exempt. It can be a lot. And so, I think probably along with this and much of what we're speaking toward is basically a classification audit, right? Part of preparing for this is going to be looking at the job descriptions you mentioned, right? Are these updated, right? Because again, if you have any other changes to make, right? If you've potentially been misclassifying individuals as exempt, perfect time to reevaluate how you're doing it and who might need to be changed and roll out any changes at the same time, we deal with the salary increase, right? It's always, in my viewpoint, it's always a good time to conduct a wage and hour audit, once a year, every other year, minimally, just because, job descriptions get stale, right? What employees do changes, and we want to make sure that, our classification decisions are based on what's actually being done.
Better you audit than the Department of Labor.
That's for sure.
Right. All right, so I don't think we need to go deeper than that because I think we've covered a lot of these topics on previous shows. We'll include in the show notes here a link to this proposed rule. Any other links to Department of Labor and timeline that we can provide will be included there. There's going to be another show here, Brian. Let me maybe put this out there. So I've said it many times. The purpose of this show is simply to bring employers the very best information we possibly can to help them stay compliant and grow their business. This is huge. We are not advocating for or against this ruling. It just is. We are explaining what the proposed rule is. I also acknowledge that this is going to rock some people's world, and there's going to be some people who say, "Gosh darn it, it's about time. We got too many lower paid salaried folks that are being taken advantage of," and there's going to be others who say this is criminal. You're going to put me out of business. So lots of opinions here. Knowing that there is, and we do our very best to not be political on this show, but if people do want to participate in this comment period, what should they do?
Yeah, so I think, certainly it will be published in the Federal Register soon. And once it does, I believe comments can be made online through the website. And so, I imagine, depending on timing of when it gets published, that could be something that that could be put out with a future article to refer employers to. But look, in addition to commenting, which again, comments are great, right? A lot of times rulemaking occurs in a setting where they're not looking at the practicalities of what employers are going to have to deal with in the real world. And so, like we mentioned before, a phased approach. If there's going to be increases, a phased approach could help employers deal with these budgetary changes. Instead of having it all happen in 2024, right? So, but it is something employers will deal with. And I think, look, what we're expressing is that it's coming down the pike potentially. We don't know when, but the more you plan, the more you'll be able to potentially deal with this in a way that it won't throw off your budget entirely. You'll be able to figure out the best way you can, have your workforce, in an environment where salaried employees get paid a lot more, right? Whether that means less salaried employees or many options are on the table, but it's about looking at that and not scraping something together at the last minute.
Yeah, the clock's ticking. We're fast approaching the fourth quarter. We're looking at 3-4 months from now. This thing could be law. I would say 3 months is not a lot of time to plan something of this magnitude, to audit all your jobs, the exempt, non-exempt classifications of those jobs, if needed, rebudget these jobs, write new job descriptions that tie out. That's a lot to do, even if you're a small employer with 5, 10, 20 employees, because you're not exempt from, almost no one is exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act, the FLSA. This is going to hit a lot of people. So please, please, please don't wait for this thing to become law. Start planning for it now. Any last words you want to give in guidance here, Brian?
No, I think that was a good way to tie it up. I think employers should stay on top of this, monitor it, but don't just monitor and wait. Even though it's not final, there are steps you can take. You'll be in a better place when the final rule comes down. Absolutely.
Worst case scenario, nothing happens, the thing gets shot down, and you have deeply thought through your job descriptions, classifications, and compensation strategy, and there's nothing wrong with that. So,
not at all.
Brian, thanks for joining me today. Thanks to everyone else. Until next week, we will talk to you later.
At Asure, we build human capital management software and services that help 90,000 companies like yours attract, develop, and retain great people. Our low upfront costs and affordable subscription model allow you to save cash to invest in things that drive growth, not overhead. To learn more about how Asure can help you claim up to $26,000 per employee with the Employee Retention Tax Credit, automate your payroll, and build productive teams that are compliant with ever-changing HR laws, visit AsureSoftware.com.